This HOA Karen sent thugs to my lake cabin to grab my wife. It was all because we refused to pay over $100,000 in fines that were completely fake. We aren't even in her HOA. The power cut out on a dark Saturday night. Suddenly, two men were storming our property, shouting that they had orders to take my wife. They thought they had cornered some quiet, helpless couple. But what they didn't know is they weren't walking up on a victim. They were walking into a trap. Because the woman they were sent to grab is an FBI tactical commander. How badly does a night end for the thugs who tried to kidnap a federal agent? Drop a comment below with where you're watching from, because you are not ready for this takedown. Tuesday, 9:12 a.m. That's the moment things broke open. Up until then, it was a morning like any other at our cabin in the Minnesota woods. The air was cool and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. I'd just finished topping off the generator oil, a ritual as regular as my first cup of coffee. 62 years on this earth, 35 as a lineman for the power company, taught me that you don't wait for things to break. You keep them running. That's all my wife Marcy and I ever wanted out here, to be left alone, to keep things running our way. Our little plot of land, with its 100 feet of lakefront, wasn't fancy, but it was ours. My grandfather bought it back when this was nothing but logging trails and wolf tracks. We owned it outright. No mortgage, no liens, and definitely no homeowners association. I was headed down the long gravel drive to check the motion sensor on the gate post. The squirrels had been chewing the wires again when I saw it. It wasn't a squirrel. It was a manila envelope, held to the wrought iron gate with a crude cross of gray duct tape. The tape was stuck so tight it was already peeling the paint. A real professional job. I tore it free, the tape making a nasty ripping sound that echoed in the quiet. There was no stamp, no postmark. Someone had driven all the way out here to stick this on my gate. The front of the envelope was typed, "No return address," just our names. Inside the cabin, Marcy was at the kitchen table, mapping out her garden beds for the spring. She looked up as I came in, sensing something was off. I don't get worked up easily. A lifetime of dealing with downed power lines in ice storms bakes the panic right out of you. But this felt different. It felt personal. I set the envelope on the table. "Someone left us a love letter," I said. She wiped her hands on her jeans and slit the top open with a butter knife. The paper inside was thick, expensive feeling, with a fancy letterhead at the top, Lakeview Ridge Property Association. I'd never heard of them. The letter was dense with formal language, a word soup of ordinances and citations that made my head swim. But one number stood out, right there in the middle of the page, bolded and underlined. $102,380.33. Marcy let out a low whistle. It wasn't a sound of fear. It was the sound she makes when she's looking at a puzzle she finds interesting. According to this letter, that was the amount we owed in past due community dues, penalties, and accrued interest. It came with an itemized list of our supposed sins. Violation, 7,753A. I read aloud, unauthorized firewood storage. I looked out the window at my woodpile, stacked neat and tight against the shed wall, seasoned for 2 years. A work of art, if you ask me. Violation 6,671L, unauthorized well repair. That one stung. I'd spent a whole weekend replacing the pressure switch on our well pump just last month, saving us a few $1,000s a plumber would have charged. I did the job right, same as I always do. The list went on. Non-compliant siding color, unapproved dock maintenance, failure to adhere to waterfront privacy ordinances, whatever the hell that meant. It was like someone had walked around our property with a clipboard, inventing fines for the simple act of living. "This is a mistake," I said, but the words felt hollow. This wasn't a mistake. The level of detail was too specific. This was an attack. Marcy was already up and heading to the big metal filing cabinet in the corner where we keep our important papers. She's the organized one. She pulled out a thick folder marked, "Property," Inside was the deed, the title insurance, the original county plat maps, from when the land was first surveyed. We spread them out on the table, right next to the demand letter. The lines on the map were clear. Our property was a perfect rectangle, grandfathered in, totally separate from the new fancy Lakeview Ridge development that had sprung up across the cove a decade ago. We weren't members of their club. We'd never been invited, and we sure as heck never signed anything. "There's nothing," she said, her finger tracing the boundary line. "No covenant, no easement, no HOA agreement. They have no jurisdiction here. Zero." I looked back at the letter, at the sheer arrogance of it. They weren't just wrong. They were acting like they were the law, demanding $100,000 for stacking firewood. I've been chased by bears quieter than this letter. This wasn't about rules. This was about someone trying to push us, thinking we were a couple of old folks who would get scared and write a check. They thought wrong. I picked up the letter, folded it neatly, and placed it next to the plat map. Evidence. That's what it was. The first piece. Tuesday, 9:12 a.m. This is when things broke open. For 3 days, that letter sat on our kitchen counter like a coiled snake. We didn't touch it, but we felt its presence in every room. The quiet of the woods didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt watchful. Every snapped twig or rustle of leaves made me glance toward the driveway. By Friday morning, the waiting was starting to wear on me. I was out in the workshop, trying to focus on rewiring an old generator motor, but my mind wasn't on the task. At 11:30 a.m., I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. It wasn't the mail carrier's familiar sedan or a delivery truck. This was a heavy vehicle, moving slow. I wiped the grease from my hands and looked out the workshop window. A dusty, dark blue pickup truck was pulling up to the cabin. The first thing I noticed was the lack of license plates, just a muddy blank space on the front and back bumpers. A big red flag. 2 men got out. They were both thick-set, wearing those cheap, high-visibility vests that make you look official from a distance. Up close, you could see the flimsy material and the stains. One was taller, with a sour look on his face, and the other was shorter and looked like he was trying too hard to seem intimidating. They walked up to our front door with a purpose that felt rehearsed. I met them on the porch before they could knock. The tall one spoke first. "We're here from the HOA's collections division," he said, his voice flat. "We need to speak to Marcy Hanlon. Not Mr. and Mrs. Hanlon. Just her." Another red flag. He didn't seem to like that I was the one standing in front of him. "I'm her husband," I said calmly. "You can talk to me." The shorter one puffed out his chest and flashed a laminated card attached to a lanyard around his neck. It had a blurry photo and the word inspector in big letters. It looked like something you'd make with a home printer. "Our business is with her," he said. "We have an order to access the property for a compliance inspection related to delinquent accounts." He pointed vaguely toward the lake. "I'm going to have to say no to that," I told them, keeping my hands visible and my feet planted. "You're on private property, and you're not invited. I'd suggest you get back in your truck and leave." Just then, the cabin door opened behind me. It was Marcy. She stepped out onto the porch, calm as a summer lake. She was on paid time off from her job, but the habits of her profession never leave her. Her eyes took in the men, the truck, the fake badges, all in a single, sweeping glance. As she moved past me, I saw her hand brush the lapel of her jacket, a tiny, almost invisible motion. To them, it probably looked like she was adjusting her collar. I knew what she was doing. She was activating her recorder. It was a little device, no bigger than a shirt button, that captured crystal clear audio and video. Standard issue for her line of work. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice polite but firm. The tall one seemed pleased to finally have her attention. "Ma'am, we're here about the outstanding balance of $102,000, he started, launching into a script he'd clearly memorized. While he was talking, I made my excuse. "I've got to check something in the woods," I said, stepping off the porch. I didn't go far. I went straight to the old hollowed-out log near the path to the wellhead. A few years back, I'd built a little motion-activated camera to see what kind of deer were coming through. It was simple. A small trail cam powered by a battery pack, hidden inside the log, perfectly weatherproof. I switched it on. It had a direct feed to an old tablet I kept in the kitchen. From the window, Marcy and I watched the show. After a few more minutes of her politely telling them they had no authority, the men finally stomped back to their truck, muttering under their breath. But they didn't leave. The log cam picked them up clear as day. The tall one went to our well cap and started trying to unscrew it. The other walked over to the main breaker box on the side of the house and began fiddling with the latch. They weren't just trespassing anymore. They were tampering with our water and our power. That's when Marcy picked up the phone and called the county sheriff. A single deputy cruiser rolled up about 20 minutes later. The deputy who got out was a man I recognized from the hardware store, Ronald Ellis. He was a lifelong local, with tired eyes that had seen more than his share of nonsense. He listened patiently as we explained the situation and showed him the tablet with the video feed. Deputy Ellis walked over to the two men, who were now leaning against their truck trying to look innocent. The conversation was short. I saw Ellis shake his head. He knew them. Or at least, he knew their type. He sent them packing, and this time, they left for good. After their taillights disappeared down the road, Ellis walked back over to me. He lowered his voice. "Listen, Bill," he said, looking around like he didn't want to be overheard. "You're not the first to have trouble with that Lakeview Ridge group. They've been pulling stunts like this for years." He paused, then looked me dead in the eye. "But with this video evidence of them tampering, you might be the last." He walked back to his cruiser and reached inside, pulling out a worn, bulging file folder. He handed it to me. There was no official marking on it, just a piece of tape with handwriting on it. "These are old complaint reports," he said quietly. "Stuff that never went anywhere. False liens, harassment, you name it. Some go back 9 years. Maybe you can find something in here that helps." He gave me a short nod, got in his car, and drove away, leaving me standing there with a decade's worth of other people's fights right in my hands. That night, our kitchen table transformed into a command center. The file folder from Deputy Ellis was the centerpiece. It felt heavy, not just from the weight of the paper, but from the years of frustration packed inside. Marcy and I sat there under the warm glow of the overhead light, a pot of coffee brewing, and we started to unpack a 9-year history of a war we never knew was being waged. We spread the documents out, organizing them by date. There were copies of angry letters, sworn statements from other property owners, and flimsy carbon copies of complaints that had been filed and then ignored. A pattern emerged almost immediately. It was the same story, over and over, with different names and different properties. A family on the North Shore was fined for having a non-conforming mailbox. An old fisherman who'd lived on the lake his whole life was hit with a lien for an unpermitted boat lift, a lift his father had. Built in the 1970s, every complaint was signed by the same person, Karen Dworth, President, Lakeview Ridge Property Association. The name from our own letter. But who was she? A quick search online painted a picture. Karen Dworth was a local real estate agent, or a consultant, as her website called her. The site was full of professional photos of her smiling in front of expensive-looking houses, but a little more digging showed her license had expired 18 months ago. She was the queen of a kingdom that was starting to look like it was built on sand. The next morning we drove into town to the county records office. It's a quiet, dusty place that smells like old paper and bureaucracy. But it's where the truth lives, carved in ink on property maps. We wanted to see the master plat with our own eyes. The clerk, a kind older woman, helped us pull the official map for our township. And there it was, clear as day. The Lakeview Ridge development was a neat little box, its boundaries marked in bold. Our property, and a half-dozen others like it along the west bank of the lake, sat completely outside that box. A note in the margin from 1988 confirmed it. Parcels 7 through 14 are grandfathered and exempt from any future homeowners association covenants. It was undeniable proof. We weren't just right. We had the county government's official stamp to back it up. But the file from Ellis told us Karen already knew that. This wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. Tucked inside one of the complaints was a logbook kept by a neighbor across the cove, an old retired birdwatcher named Stan. For 2 years, Stan had documented every strange vehicle, every person snooping around properties that weren't theirs. His notes were meticulous, with dates, times, and descriptions. June 12, 9:40 a.m. Dark blue truck. No plates. 2 men in vests walked boundary of Miller property. Took photos. August 3rd, 2:15 p.m. Woman in white SUV. Karen Dworth, with developer from out of state. Pointing at Hanlon cabin. That entry made the hair on my arm stand up. She wasn't just harassing us. She was showing off our home. The most damning piece of evidence was buried deep in a complaint from 3 years prior. A man had attached a printed copy of an email he'd received by mistake. It was from Karen, sent to a big developer based in the city. The date was April 11. I'll never forget what it said. We are moving forward with the acquisitions. Expect full compliance from the West Bank by fall. The holdouts will be managed. Holdouts. That's what we were to her. Obstacles. She wasn't trying to enforce rules. She was trying to force people out, to absorb our independent lots into her little empire, so she could package them up and sell the whole block for a massive profit. Her fake fines and bogus violations were tools of eviction, designed to bleed people dry until they gave up and sold cheap. You can't vote against gravity. You can't forge landlines into being. But Karen tried. We spent the rest of the week putting everything together. We made copies of every document. We cross-referenced Stan's log with the complaints. We created a timeline of Karen's escalating aggression. The shock and confusion from that first letter had burned off, replaced by a cold, clear focus. This was bigger than a $100,000 fine. It was about our home, our rights, and the rights of every person whose name was in that folder. Marcy was quiet, her face set in the same determined way it got when she was working a tough case. She wasn't just the wife of a retired lineman anymore. This had crossed a line into her world, and Karen Dworth had no idea who she had just picked a fight with. Having a mountain of evidence is one thing. Arranging it so that it tells a clear, undeniable story is another. That's where Marcy shines. For the next week, our cabin became a war room dedicated to dismantling Karen Dworth's fraudulent empire, piece by simple piece. We decided to build a case so clean and straightforward that a 6th grader could understand it, and we did it in 3 simple steps. First, we started with the most basic truth: the land itself. I went back to the county office and paid $10 for 2 certified large-format copies of the official plat map, the one that showed the black and white boundary lines. On one copy, I took a yellow highlighter and traced the border of the Lakeview Ridge HOA. On the other, I highlighted our property in blue. There was a clear unhighlighted gap between them. You didn't need to be a surveyor to see it. We were not, and had never been, inside their lines. That was Exhibit A. Next, I dug out our property tax bills for the past 5 years. I laid them out on the table, side by side. Each one had a detailed breakdown: county tax, school district tax, a small fee for the local fire department. What wasn't there was a line item for an HOA. If you are legally part of an HOA, you often see a special assessment or fee listed right there on your county tax bill. Ours was clean. I made crisp photocopies of each one. That was Exhibit B. 5 years of the government confirming we owed Karen's association nothing. The third step was to deal with the two goons who came to our door. I couldn't forget their cheap laminated badges and their smug attitudes. I went online to the State Licensing Board's public database. It's a simple search page where you can check if a contractor, an electrician, or even a private security agent is legitimate. We didn't know their last names, but that didn't matter. There were only 4 licensed property compliance inspectors in our entire county. I printed out their photos and license numbers. None of them were the men from the truck. They were frauds, plain and simple. Exhibit C. While I was gathering the physical proof, Marcy made a single, quiet phone call. She spoke for less than 5 minutes. The next day, a friend of hers from the bureau, a man named James who specialized in cyber forensics, agreed to look at something for her as a favor. We sent him the public web address for the Lakeview Ridge HOA's online payment portal. James called back 2 hours later. He explained it in terms so simple even I could follow. Karen's association had a website where official members could log in and pay their dues, but the system's logs, the website's internal memory, told a story. He found the exact date and time when Karen Dworth herself, using her own administrative login, had manually added 5 non-member addresses to the billing system. Ours was at the top of the list. It wasn't a glitch. It was deliberate, targeted fraud, and he had the digital receipt to prove it. But that wasn't all he found. Buried in the public documents section of their website was a PDF of the meeting minutes from 3 years ago. It claimed the HOA had voted to begin annexation proceedings for the West Bank properties. The document was signed by Karen and stamped by a notary public. It looked official, but James had checked the notary's commission number against the state database. The notary's license had expired in 2014. Karen had used an old, invalid stamp to forge an official document, likely thinking no one would ever bother to check. Her fraud game was strong. Her paper trail game? Sloppy. James emailed us a full report with screenshots and official records. That became Exhibit D. We compiled everything into a thick, organized binder with clear plastic sleeves for each document. A full copy went straight to Deputy Ellis at the sheriff's office, and a second was sent by certified mail to the state attorney general's office. We weren't just complaining anymore. We were formally reporting multiple crimes. For a while, things were quiet. Too quiet. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, Karen escalated. We found another notice, duct taped to our gate. This one wasn't a letter. It was a thick, legal-looking document with a menacing header in bold, capital letters, Notice of Intent to Foreclose. It claimed that due to our failure to pay the $380.33, the Lakeview Ridge Property Association was seizing our land. It was filled with legal jargon, and at the top, it listed a court docket number to make it look like it had been filed with the district court. My stomach tightened. This was a whole new level of attack. But Marcy was calm. She took one look at the docket number, went to her laptop, and typed it into the state's public court records portal. After a moment, she turned the screen to me. The result was a single, stark sentence. No case found matching this number. The docket number was fake. Just like the fines, just like the inspectors, just like the notary stamp. It was all a lie. But it was a dangerous one. Karen was no longer just trying to fine us. She was trying to steal our home. The fake foreclosure notice marked a new chapter. It was a declaration of war. Before, Karen's attacks were on paper, a storm of lies and forged documents. But this was different. This was an attempt to take the roof over our heads. We knew she wouldn't stop. The only question was what she would do next. The answer came 2 weeks later, on a Saturday night. A cold front had moved in, and a hard, driving rain was lashing against the windows. I'd just put another log in the wood stove, and the warmth was finally starting to push back against the damp chill. Marcy was sitting in her favorite armchair, reading a book. Around 9 p.m., the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then they went out completely, plunging the cabin into a deep, profound darkness broken only by the orange glow from the stove. My first thought was the storm. I was a lineman for 35 years. I know what wind and rain can do to a power line. I got up to grab the big maglite from the kitchen drawer. That's when our landline phone, the old-fashioned one that's supposed to work when the power is out, went dead. Not even a dial tone. Just silence. "That's not the storm," Marcy said, her voice cutting through the dark. She was already on her feet. She moved to the window overlooking the lake, pulling the curtain back just a fraction of an inch. She stood there for a long moment, perfectly still. Then she said a word that made the blood run cold in my veins. "Surveying." I came up beside her. "What do you see?" She pointed out into the blackness, toward the dense line of trees at the edge of our property. "Look, just above the old stump." I squinted, my eyes trying to adjust. At first I saw nothing but rain and darkness. Then I caught it. A tiny, almost imperceptible red dot, dancing on the wet bark of a pine tree. Then another, sweeping across the side of our shed. They were infrared laser dots. The kind you can't see easily with the naked eye unless you know exactly what to look for. Someone was out there, in the storm, mapping our home. This was a tactical approach. They had cut the power and the phones to isolate us. Now they were identifying sight lines and entry points. Marcy didn't panic. She just switched modes. I watched the woman I had my morning coffee with disappear, and FBI Tactical Commander Hanlon took her place. "Bill," she said, her voice low and steady, "go to the workshop. Get the log cam feed up on the tablet. You're my eyes and ears. Do not engage. Just watch and report what you see to me." She went to the heavy-duty storage locker we kept in our bedroom closet. It wasn't for valuables. It was her go-bag. She pulled out a lightweight tactical vest, a small encrypted radio, and a set of zip-tie restraints. She wasn't just preparing, she was operating. As she keyed the radio, she spoke in short, quiet phrases, signaling her field office, giving our location and a code for a potential home invasion in progress. While she geared up, I made my way to the workshop, using the faint glow of my phone screen to navigate. I got the tablet powered on and pulled up the live feed from the log cam. The camera's night vision cut through the darkness, painting the scene in an eerie green and black. Two figures were moving through the trees. They were dressed in dark rain gear, moving with a clumsy confidence, like men who thought they were being stealthy but weren't. They were the same two men from before, Clyde and Trent. They reached the clearing in front of the cabin. One of them spoke into a walkie-talkie. Through the camera's microphone, I could hear his tinny voice. "We're at the door. No lights, no movement. Ready to make entry." Then Marcy stepped out onto the porch. She stood there, unarmed, just a silhouette against the faint light from the stove inside. "You boys are a long way from home," she said, her voice carrying clearly over the sound of the rain. They were startled. They hadn't expected to be met. The taller one, Clyde, recovered first. He put his hand on a large object on his hip, not a gun, but a heavy-duty taser. "Ma'am, we have orders to detain you for civil enforcement," he shouted over the wind. "You need to come with us, now." This was it. Karen had sent them to physically grab her. They started to move up the porch steps, separating to flank her. It was a sloppy, telegraphed move. And it was the last mistake they'd make that night. Marcy took one step forward. In a single fluid motion, she closed the distance with the first man, Trent. She deflected his clumsy grab, used his momentum against him, and spun him into a joint lock that sent him face first onto the slick porch boards. He let out a choked cry of pain. Clyde fumbled for his taser, but he was too slow. Marcy was already moving. She sidestepped, grabbed the wrist of his taser hand, and applied pressure to a nerve point. His fingers flew open, the weapon clattering to the ground. She spun him around and forced him to his knees next to his partner. It was over. From the moment she stepped forward to the moment both men were neutralized on the ground, The tablet's timestamp showed 11 seconds had passed. She hadn't thrown a single punch. It was all speed, leverage, and a deep understanding of how the human body works and how to make it stop working. As she was pulling the zip ties tight on their wrists, the woods lit up with red and blue flashing lights. Deputy Ellis's cruiser came tearing up the driveway, followed by two more. Marcy's call had been heard. The deputies cuffed Clyde and Trent and read them their rights. One of the younger deputies found their wallets. Tucked inside each one was a crisp printout of a wire transfer confirmation. A $5,000 payment to each of them, sent that afternoon from a corporate account. The name on the account was Dworth Real Estate Consulting. Karen hadn't just hired them, she'd paid them, and she left a receipt. The arrest of Clyde and Trent was like pulling a single loose thread that unraveled Karen Dworth's entire world. They were not hardened criminals. They were hired muscle, and their loyalty lasted only as long as they thought Karen had power. Once they were sitting in a cold interrogation room, facing serious charges like assault, trespassing, and conspiracy, they started talking. They gave up Karen's name in less than 10 minutes. The very next day, a Sunday, was unnervingly quiet. But by Monday morning, the wheels of justice, which had seemed so rusty and slow, began to turn with surprising speed. At 10 a.m., Deputy Ellis, along with a detective from the county sheriff's office, paid a visit to Karen Dworth at her pristine home in the Lakeview Ridge development. They didn't come to chat. They came with a warrant for her arrest. Because Marcy was the victim of the attempted assault, she couldn't be directly involved in the official investigation. But given her professional background and the unique circumstances, the district attorney's office made an exception. She was cleared to assist with the interviews and observe the interrogation. It was a professional courtesy, but also a smart move. Nobody knew Karen's case better than Marcy. 11 a.m. Monday. That's when we watched Karen collapse. She was brought into a small, sterile interview room at the sheriff's department. I was allowed to watch from an observation room behind a one-way mirror, along with the county prosecutor. Marcy was in the room, sitting quietly at the table opposite Karen, alongside the lead detective. Karen walked in trying to project an aura of indignant outrage. She wore a crisp business suit, her hair perfectly in place. She looked like a woman who had come to complain about a subordinate, not a criminal defendant. She immediately started talking, her voice sharp and condescending. She denied everything. She claimed she had no idea who Clyde and Trent were. She said our complaints were a bizarre and malicious campaign of harassment against her and the HOA. She called us troublemakers and squatters. The detective let her talk, patiently listening as she built a wall of lies around herself. Marcy didn't say a word. She just watched, her expression unreadable. After Karen had exhausted her tirade, the detective slid the first piece of paper across the table. It was a printout of the wire transfer records, showing the two $5,000 payments to her hired thugs. "Can you explain these, Ms. Dworth?" he asked. Karen's composure flickered for the first time. "That was a payment for consulting services," she stammered, "for property assessment." Next, the detective slid a second document across the table. It was a copy of the email to the developer, the one where she promised full compliance from the West Bank by fall, and referred to us as the holdouts. Her face went pale. "That's taken out of context," she said, her voice losing its edge. Then came the master stroke. The detective placed a small digital audio recorder on the table and pressed play. A voice filled the room, Karen's voice, captured from a Zoom meeting she had held with her HOA board 2 months prior. The recording had been provided by a board member who, after learning of the arrests, decided to cooperate fully to save himself. On the recording, Karen's voice was smug and confident. "The fines aren't sticking," she told her board. "So we move to the next phase. We'll fine them into selling. If they won't sell, we'll make their lives so miserable they'll have to." There was a long, Dead silence in the room after the recording ended. The color had completely drained from Karen's face. The mask of the powerful HOA president was gone. In her place sat a cornered, frightened woman who had been caught. She looked at the detective, then her eyes darted to Marcy. For the first time, she seemed to realize who she was up against. The fight went out of her. She just slumped in her chair, a puppet with its strings cut. The news of Karen's arrest spread through the community like wildfire. Within 48 hours, the other 4 members of the Lakeview Ridge HOA board resigned in a panic, sending a joint letter to the county disavowing all of Karen's actions. They claimed they had been misled, that they had no idea she was forging documents and hiring criminals. Faced with an ironclad case and abandoned by her allies, Karen's lawyer advised her to take a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to multiple felony counts: fraud, false impersonation, conspiracy to commit unlawful entry, and filing a false legal document. I was in the courtroom when the judge accepted her plea. When the deputy moved behind her to put her in handcuffs, there was a quiet, final click that echoed in the silent room. It was the sound of her reign of terror coming to an end. But the story didn't end there. The state attorney general's office, armed with our meticulously organized binder, launched a full investigation into the Lakeview Ridge Property Association. They found years of financial misconduct and systemic abuse. A judge issued a court order, and 2 weeks later, the HOA was formally and permanently dissolved. Its charter was revoked. It simply ceased to exist. 3 months later, I was sitting on the back porch, watching the sun burn the morning mist off the lake. The air was clean, the only sounds were the lapping of water against the shore and the cry of a distant loon. It was quiet again. A real quiet. Not the watchful, tense silence we'd been living with. I had a steaming mug of coffee in my hands, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I wasn't scanning the tree line. I was just enjoying the view. The screen door creaked open, and Marcy came out, holding a small stack of mail. She sat down in the chair next to me and handed me an envelope. It was from the state attorney general's office. It was thick. I tore it open, and a check fluttered out onto my lap. It was a cashier's check, made out to William and Marcy Hanlon, for the amount of $87,000. It was the first payment of the court-ordered restitution from Karen Dworth's frozen assets. Money to cover our legal fees, the cost of repairing the breaker box her thugs had tampered with, and damages for their harassment. I looked at the number, then looked out at the woods where the deer used to graze before all the strange trucks and commotion had scared them off. "Well," I said, taking a sip of coffee, "it won't bring the deer back, but it'll buy a few fences." Marcy smiled, that small, satisfied smile of hers. "It's a start," she said. Just then, the phone inside started ringing. It was a sound that had put us on edge for weeks, but now it was just a sound. I went in to answer it. It was Deputy Ellis. His voice sounded different, lighter. "Morning, Bill," he said. "Just thought you and your wife would like to know. The county commissioners passed the new ordinances this morning. They're calling it the Property Rights Protection Act." He explained the changes. From now on, no HOA in the county could issue a fine, a notice, or any kind of enforcement action to a non-member property. Period. All HOA boards were now required to be officially registered with the county clerk, with a public list of their officers. And copies of their meeting minutes and recordings had to be logged with the county records office, making secret votes and backroom deals impossible. Our fight hadn't just saved our own skin. It had built a permanent wall to protect everyone else. After I hung up, I stood there for a minute, just letting it sink in. We hadn't just won. We had changed the rules of the game for good. Over the next few weeks, something else started to change. The other families on the West Bank, the ones who had been quietly battling Karen for years, started stopping by. First, it was Stan, the old fisherman whose family had been here as long as mine. He walked up the drive one afternoon with a small package wrapped in butcher paper. It was a pound of his homemade venison jerky. He didn't say much, just nodded and said, "Heard what you did. 'Bout time someone did." A few days later, another neighbor, a retired mechanic, came by and spent an hour helping me tune up the generator, refusing any payment. He said Karen had been trying to fine him for years for the unapproved color of the grease rags hanging on his clothesline. It was a small community again. Not one drawn on a forged map, but one built on shared relief and mutual respect. People waved when they drove past. They stopped to talk at the mailbox. The fear that Karen had used to keep everyone isolated was gone, and in its place, something better was growing. I thought about it a lot, sitting on that porch. Our life was built on simple things: a solid roof, clean water from the well, a cord of dry wood for the winter. Things you can rely on. Karen Dworth and her paper empire had tried to take that away. She thought power came from a rulebook and a fancy title. But real power, I realized, comes from knowing you're in the right and having the proof to back it up. Not all fights come with fists. Some come with folders and certified copies and a quiet phone call to the right person. But it's still a fight worth having. You can't fine your way into someone's life. You can't force respect. It has to be earned. And if you come from my family with lies and thugs, you'd better pray my wife doesn't answer the door.